Hello and welcome to the Open Era Podcast. My name is Devang Desai. This week we have another Open Era look back, and we're going to focus in on the 1980 Wimbledon men's singles final, the epic between Björn Borg and John McEnroe. Simon and I had watched Borg versus McEnroe, the movie that had just come out at that time in Vancouver. We saw it together, and then we recorded a podcast soon after, talking about both the film and the match itself. I think we both came away from the film quite captivated, and I thought it did a really good job of kind of bringing us back into that moment of time in the tennis landscape, in the wider sporting landscape, seeing how different these two people were. And I thought the movie did a great job of kind of outlining that for us, as well as getting a glimpse into kind of what the circuit was like back in the 80s, back when tennis was arguably at its most popular, or one of its most popular moments, as people like John McEnroe and Björn Borg were able to captivate people outside of just tennis fans, which is a pretty rare feat sometimes, just given how much this sport is competing with other things. I think in the 80s and at this time as well, tennis was doing quite well, and it was off the back of this pretty special rivalry. So hope you enjoy this Open Era look back. It's the 1980 men's Wimbledon final. We're talking Borg McEnroe, talking about the film, some discussion about the choices made by the directors and also by the actors themselves when they portrayed these two tennis greats. So hope you enjoyed the episode, and thanks for listening to Open Era.
The 1980 Wimbledon men's singles final showcased a contrasting matchup of styles and personalities as the ice-cool Swede Björn Borg faced the volatile New Yorker John McEnroe. Borg was playing in his fifth consecutive Wimbledon final, having won the previous four. Still only 24 years of age, he dropped only 2 sets en route to the final, while McEnroe had conceded 3. McEnroe was just 21 years old and playing in his first Wimbledon singles final. In his semi-final victory over Jimmy Connors, he'd picked up an official warning from the umpire. The stage was set for an intriguing showdown.
Bang, it's a double tie-in here. We're going to try and go high concept with this. It's a nice tie-in because we both managed to take in the film Borg McEnroe, which played recently at the Vancouver International Film Festival, the Janis Metz-Peterson film, which came out starring Shia LaBeouf, of all people.
Who was great.
Really good,
I'm still shocked at how good he was as John McEnroe in that film.
Look, I get that you got your hero, you know, your gentleman, Borg, and you need a villain.
Do you think you'll be able to keep your temper?
Let's talk about tennis. Does anybody have any tennis questions?
Do you enjoy being a villain? Do you feel it actually helps you?
Do you think you'll be able to keep your temper?
Why don't you shut the fuck up, man? Are you watching the matches?
Yes, I'm watching the matches.
You don't understand what the fuck it takes to play tennis. You know, I go out there and I give everything for this game. Everything. Everything in me gets left out on that fucking court. And none of you understand it because none of you do it.
So it's a nice tie-in. For those who don't know, the 1980 Wimbledon final is by and large thought of as the greatest tennis match of all time, besides one other Wimbledon final which may have surpassed it in the eyes of many.
Both of which featured insane tiebreaks that made no sense.
Oh my goodness. Watching both of those finals back, we're referring to the 2008 Wimbledon final between Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal. Of course, it has to be that. It had to be Wimbledon finals as well, didn't it, in the world of tennis? Let's try and get to this final in 1980 and try and summarize why it was so important. You had two of the biggest stars in the sport, and you certainly had a guy in Björn Borg who was at the height of his powers at this point.
He was a rock star, and he was a rock star in the weirdest sense of it, without any of the bravado or the in-your-face antics that we come used to when we see celebrities enjoying the limelight. I think people enjoyed the fact that he was a good-looking man, the fact that he was kind of mysterious. We didn't know much about him, as compared to John McEnroe, where we almost knew too much about him based on how he acted on the court and how he acted in the press. So it was really a contrast of styles. But Bush, I think you might agree with me here. Both these players laid plenty of groundwork for what we see today, and I think it's especially true in how people carry themselves now in the tennis circuit, whereas you see many more Björk types than McEnroe types.
Absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt. Björn Borg was the epitome of class, or what was perceived to be class in in that time period. And it's very interesting looking back and seeing how John McEnroe was perceived at that time. He was booed when he came on to center
Literally
court.
booed.
Literally booed.
At Wimbledon, which in terms of ranking Grand Slam crowds, I think you would argue that it's the most cathedral-like of the Grand Slam.
Polite,
yeah, exactly. Right?
Yeah.
Like Australia is usually pretty raucous. US Open speaks for itself. It's nuts. And the French, I think, don't have any issue hiding who they're cheering for. But at Wimbledon, it's always almost like you have to be polite to a fault. And I think what shocked me the most watching this film was how much McEnroe was visibly and audibly hated by the crowd.
They hated him. You don't find many players certainly in the 2000s, who can rival the way that John McEnroe was viscerally despised by the crowd. He was despised for many reasons, mostly because he was, to the crowd's eyes, a spoiled brat, a guy who would throw his racket, who would throw temper tantrums, who would swear at his opponents, would shove people at the net. We would do everything to try and get under the skin of his opponents.
No, it was a bit of a spread, Mr. McEnroe. That was a good call.
Excuse me?
That was a bit of a spread.
Look, you can't be serious, man. You cannot be serious! That ball was on the line. Chalk flew up. It was clearly in. How can you possibly call that out? How many are you gonna miss? Now he's walking over. Everyone knows it's in this whole stadium, and you call it out? Explain that to me.
But I think the film actually does a really good job of getting into the psyche of how McEnroe was. He was just 21 at this point when he was going into this final. He was a teenage phenomenon, and he was a guy that was ruthlessly pushed by his parents and everyone around him. It's no real surprise that he turned out the way he did.
Not at all. And I think I credit Peterson in terms of a filmmaker of capturing that essence of McEnroe where Borg was very sympathetic as a figure both then and now. We look back as you said, one of the more classy players of all time. But if you knew the backstory of what John McEnroe was dealing with back then, I think that would have shaded his coverage a bit more. And I think those clips of his father kind of always reminding him that even though he was excellent, that wasn't quite good enough, resonates with a lot of us who may have experienced that in our own times.
Björn Borg, known as the Iceman, simply because of that personality, just nothing really got to him, which is funny because you see all the behind the scenes stuff with him and you realize that he was completely opposite, very similar to the likes of how Federer is always spoken of, a very kind of boisterous teenager, someone who is like wore his heart on his sleeve. The same with Björn Borg, but that emotion got channeled, and I think he learned how to hold himself and not let that get the better of him, which is kind of a very strange transition from someone who was so the opposite of when he was a teenager.
Borg was a lot like McEnroe back when he was starting out, in the sense that he would throw tantrums on the court and openly yell at his coach and openly yell at his opponents. And in many ways, I know this parallel gets drawn maybe ad nauseum, but Roger Federer was much the same in the sense that his energy was not being channeled in the proper area until that switch kind of clicked. And I think Borg, not only did it click, but he went on to become one of the greatest of all time, and that channeling of the aggression onto the court was the reason why.
So Borg is the baseliner. He is, I don't know how far you want to go into it, but I certainly credit him as one of the first true baseliners to really dominate in the scene.
What do you think the margin for error was for those baseliners back then, with the racket technology at what it was and the lack of insane whip forehands that we see now? They weren't there at the time. And I feel like there was a possibility of messing up so far much more often back then than there is now.
Even the stroke style, the way that those guys are swinging the racket.
It's way shorter.
Way shorter. Yeah. The take back is much kind of more rounded, and it doesn't finish quite the same way that they do at the moment. There's not the same level of topspin that they're putting on the ball. It's just a different game in its entirety.
And that, I think it worked especially well when you went against serve and volley players or volleyers in general, like McEnroe, who found comfort at the net. When you're hitting such a flat ball that's dipping so quickly, I think without that spin, it's even harder to volley, and that's what Borg mastered.
It's funny, I was listening to, I can't remember whose opinion I was listening to earlier, but they were deriding the use of the two-handed backhand, which actually managed to kill the serve and volley, on the basis that old-fashioned tennis would dictate that you would hit into the person's backhand, which would be their weakest shot, and you would get to the net as soon as possible. You kind of see a little bit of that, and of course Björn Borg with that two-handed backhand, that beautiful two-handed backhand, which I still think is the best two-handed backhand I've ever seen in my life. As Devang sits there and slowly stews in his own juices for my constant takes about Björn Borg. Should we get to this final then? Because It's a truly remarkable 5-set encounter that has everything you can possibly want in a tennis match.
Just before we do that, I mean, we can get to how they got there, but for Borg, it was pretty straightforward, no real hiccups. I mean, he had a bit of a blip against Gottfried in the semifinals, but McEnroe in the film does a great job of showing this, and there was this huge controversy with his good friend Peter Fleming, who he grew up with, played with, and he was accused of hiding Fleming's shin or ankle brace before the match. Right, yeah. And McEnroe goes on to beat Fleming, and basically they have it out in the locker room. Now, whether or not the filmmaker took liberties with this, we don't know exactly. I'm not quite sure if he read anything else about this to confirm or deny that Fleming accused McEnroe of sabotaging him, as it made him seem in the film. But I think that did a great job of encapsulating how McEnroe was, in the sense that he could treat his friends wonderfully off the court, or even respect them, kind of. And then when it came to as soon as the match was about to get started, it didn't matter anymore.
Two just incredible, going back to Borg and McEnroe, just such...
Ruthless.
Ruthless, but just in different ways. McEnroe with that sort of nasty streak that he has in him, like the real will do anything to win kind of thing. Borg much more within the lines, just an absolute killer on a tennis court. McEnroe, the will do literally anything, including destroying his best friend and doubles partner in a locker room just to get one over on him.
When we look back at these sporting events that have taken place in the past, I really wonder what or how they would have been perceived or looked at by the media or by the fans if they happened at this time. And I wonder, in the age of Twitter, which I know you love, I wonder how incidents like that, because that would have gotten out in the press, or incidents like Connors and McEnroe going nutso at each other in the semifinals, or McEnroe openly deriding Borg in the press before the final. I mean, it would have been a field day, and I'm sure it was back then, but now we're so saturated with this coverage and this content that I feel like it would have taken on a life of its own that we couldn't even imagine.
Yeah, he would be a very derisive figure. You feel like he would be almost a martyr to some people in terms of how he approaches the game.
And I think, especially with the way American tennis is now, man, would they love a guy like John McEnroe.
Let's get on to this final. As we mentioned, John McEnroe is resoundingly booed coming onto the court. He truly is.
As akin to like a professional wrestling entrance, almost.
Yeah, I'm surprised they didn't, play the Rock's theme as he's heading out, even though it's 20 years prior to the Rock becoming a professional athlete.
That filmmaker would have taken some huge liberties if he had done that. But
you can imagine the reviews of that. Didn't like that direction, but I understood where he was coming from.
One of my few qualms is when they played music that was not released yet during this.
Little anachronistic, if you will. The reason, as we were mentioning, that McEnroe was booed is certainly his antics, but the Jimmy Connors stuff in the semi-final set him up because him and Connors didn't really like each other that much.
Two peas in a pod.
Indeed, same personality types, two people who just wanted to win at all costs, and I think that's the one thing that really struck me about the film more than anything when it came to McEnroe's psyche, is that he just wanted to win so badly that he didn't really know where the line was. He was way over the line so many times that he just had blinders onto it just because of his desire to win.
It was the American who dominated proceedings early on, his brilliance leaving Borg in the starting blocks.
Game to McEnroe.
So this match begins in the fashion that you wouldn't really have expected from a number one seed. Björn Borg is the defending champion, but he gets blitzed by John McEnroe, and he loses the first set 6-1.
McEnroe doing all that zany diving stuff at the net, covering the court like a madman, playing like he had played the entire tournament. I think Borg had started slowly in a couple of matches to start, and we saw that again, but he wasn't going against the same caliber of player as he was back then, so I think there was legit fear amongst the Borg camp. Actually, I think the odds makers, if you were watching this live at the time, would have liked McEnroe's chances just based on his freshness and also the fact that Borg looked actually shook.
It's interesting. The film it pokes a little bit at this idea that he was fallible in this final simply because of it goes to many lengths to point out the fact that Borg, as we know after this, retires not too long after this and cites effectively burnout from the sport. And you could see a little bit of that in this tournament is the fact that he felt the weight of what was going on. And certainly the film draws that attention, is that Borg was a guy that really was very insular and very private. And I think the weight of this and the achievement that was going to happen if he won this title really started to weigh on him.
Right, even so much to push away the few people that were close to him, including his coach and his girlfriend at the time, as being so insular. So imagine you're already that closed off, and then the people who are in your inner circle are also pushed away. That kind of went to show he was ready to stop very soon. And if it wasn't after this, it was going to be soon after.
Borg manages to get back into this match by winning the second set. Not really a whole lot in this one, but the Swede manages to take the second set and, evens things up. McEnroe
cursing at himself, yelling,
exactly.
Yelling at people, yelling at the linesman. God, I loved it. I loved it so much.
Borg wins the third set, and you think at this point he's just a set away from winning that Wimbledon title again and really cementing his place at this point as the greatest player to have ever played. Certainly, it's interesting looking at 1980, right, and how Björn Borg is viewed through this lens at this point in time. I don't think anyone thought that anyone was going to beat the record that he set.
No, I think that's fair, especially amongst the pundits at the time, indicating that we'll never see something like this again, which was repeated again and again.
All right, let's get to the fourth.
The magical fourth.
The fourth set. This fourth set goes down in infamy and in tennis lore. I still think it's probably the most drama-packed set that's ever existed in tennis, and even those sets that existed between Roger and Rafa in 2008, I don't think come close to this one. It goes sort of back and forth. McEnroe has some ridiculous shots, including, of course, all of those diving shots.
Literally, it'd be like if you scripted a bad sports movie and the guy was literally diving every which way, but it happened. It actually happened.
I feel like the people who wrote Wimbledon, the rom-com.
With Kirsten Dunst and, who is it? Was it Bettany?
Yeah, Paul Bettany, is that?
Yeah, I think so. What happens in that movie? Do they both win?
He wins.
He wins.
He wins.
She's playing as well, though.
She loses, right?
Okay, I mean, I'd have to. I was going to watch it tonight, but I guess not anymore because it's spoiler alert.
I've ruined everything.
Spoiler alert.
If you're planning on watching that movie, I do apologize.
That's how I get psyched before every major tournament. I watch a terrible tennis movie.
So we come to, it's 6 games all, and we come to the tiebreak. The tiebreak, which is very new at this point in 1980.
Couple years old?
Yeah, maybe 2 years old at this point. So there's an interesting fact that if Borg had won this tiebreak to win the match, he would have been only the second person in Grand Slam history to have won on a tiebreak.
And the reason they implemented this was because matches were going too long, or they wanted to increase the drama. Column A, column B kind of thing?
A little bit of that, yeah. The tiebreak, for those who don't know, you have to win by 2 clear points first to 7 or 2 clear points after that. And this thing goes on forever. Forever. It's multiple championship points for Borg. Multiple times, John McEnroe is down and looks like he's completely out, and somehow finds a way to keep grinding and fighting back.
No, just out. Well, that was a winner, of course. McEnroe was absolutely nowhere near it, but it just missed. And of course, it's set point number 7 for McEnroe.
Quiet, please.
Yes, 2 sets all.
Borg later described losing that epic 4th-set tiebreak as one of the worst moments of his tennis career.
J-Mac saves 5 match points.
Yep.
Borg saves 5 set points.
There you go, back and forth. There is brilliance in here. There is stupidity. There is everything you could possibly imagine. Unbelievable drama. For those who don't know, a tiebreak is usually over pretty quickly. Like the aim of it is to have a resolution to the set more quickly than having to go on forever. But these two guys are going for as long as you can possibly imagine. It gets to 17-16 and John McEnroe finally puts it away. 18-16 in the tiebreak. one of the greatest moments in tennis history.
So at this moment, you're imagining that Borg is shook to his core. He squandered what probably was his best chance to capture another Wimbledon title. It's over, right? McEnroe's going to put him away.
Yeah, the younger guy, the more hungry guy who comes back.
Yeah.
The old champion is toppled. Old champion. What's Borg here, like 25?
25, I think. Yeah. Possibly younger. Possibly.
It's a ridiculous stat that he never lost to someone younger than him besides McEnroe once.
I wonder if you were in his shoes. And this is impossible to say because we are obviously not amazing professional athletes. But I wonder if you were at the top of your sport for that long and you knew that you were getting kind of tired of being in the spotlight that much and you had your life paid for you because of how good you were monetarily wise. Could you stop?
I think so, yeah.
I think, but like now you look at it, like I know Roger said like one of the examples loves the game and Serena loves the game, but like it begs the question if Borg is the most sane professional athlete to be a star ever because it makes a lot of sense.
Just the spotlight and everything that goes with it. There's the opening scene of the movie where he's just walking to try and get a coffee and he's just hounded by people.
Literally putting on a disguise to go.
trying to get away from hordes of screaming
and
fans.
Also that really, we could all empathize. He forgot his keys to his Ferrari, I believe. Yeah, right.
Really going with
the everyman approach to
down on his luck, can't get into his
car. Damn, my Ferrari's I locked my Ferrari keys in the car. Ugh.
Poor Björn Borg. No, actually, poor Björn Borg in a lot of ways. Aside for that, the problems of the super rich. So we come into the fifth set. Björn Borg and John McEnroe put on a display in this fifth set. The one thing that's so remarkable to me, even after that tiebreak, is the mental resolve that Björn Borg has to come back and just fire down serves. Just over and over again. His serve is so dominant in the fifth set.
He loses how many points?
How many points?
2
He lost 2
points.
points. 2 points in the entirety of the fifth set.
Get out of here.
In 7 service games.
15-14.
So having had 7 championship points, Borg, he now has 2 more.
That's it!
Björn Borg somehow grinds out an 8-6 final set win and wins Wimbledon for a 5th straight year. Wonderful match, wonderful tournament, and my goodness.
Wonderful movie as well.
It was. I'm really glad I saw it, just to get a better insight into... I think I knew John McEnroe more at the end of this film. I thought I knew Björn Borg to the extent of... You get the idea of what Borg is from his early retirement and just the way he talks and his reclusiveness, the fact that he didn't even appear on anything to do with tennis for over 2 decades or something ridiculous. So you know who that character is, kind of anyway.
Right.
McEnroe, I had no idea about.
A lot of my tennis knowledge comes from my dad, who was a big fan, and this was the heyday, right? So whenever he talked about Borg, though, it was always like silky smooth and like words like that would use to describe him. But he loved McEnroe, and I think a lot of people of his generation who were in the States at that time loved John McEnroe to the point where tennis seems like such a stuffy sport sometimes, and he made it seem like that wasn't the case, even though he grew up as an insanely rich kid who like had everything at his disposal. He didn't really act like it, and we didn't know that he was afforded all these privileges really when we saw him losing his mind on the tennis court. In a weird way, that was an endearing quality.
The quintessential American...
Heart on his sleeve.
Yeah, like goes out there and just tells it like it is.
And you're right, though, because I didn't know much about Borg in the sense that I didn't realize that it wasn't supposed to be like this for him. Like, he wasn't anointed as this next superstar. Like, he had to work his ass off to become what he was, and basically getting banned from his tennis club as a youth because he was too aggressive and too crazy, and fighting that and finding a coach who believed in him, and then look at him now.
People see the end product, right, when it comes to professional athletes, especially when it comes to the greatest of all time who play their sports, and they see it and it's like, that's easy. And they don't put the 2 and 2 together of the amount of grind and the amount of hard work that it takes to get to that point. And like, oftentimes the greatest who ever play are the hardest workers of all time as well. There's very, very few occasions where you can say, oh no, he just rolled off the couch and he was just really talented. I mean, how many athletes can you really say that about? It doesn't really happen that much. But the other thing about Borg, which is the remarkable thing, aside for Rafael Nadal and Roger Federer, I think he has the most strong mental ability of any tennis player I've ever seen. Someone who just refused to ever get flustered, just ground forever, and just.
I'd put in the men's game. I put Pete up there as well in terms of you didn't really know what Pete Sampras was thinking, and I think that was a skill that he had that. Compared to your boy Andre Agassi, you could see the anguish in Andre's face a lot when he was playing, and he wouldn't really hide anything. With Pete, it was like that same look he had. But I agree with you there in terms of the stoic amazingness of just being calm when you're not supposed to be calm.
I love narratives in sport. I think they're so beautiful, right? Because you have these two guys who are fire and ice and the polar opposites, and you have Pete and Andre who come a decade after this, then Roger and Rafa, who are sort of polar opposites, but not at the same time. And then who knows what is coming up? Zverev and Kyrgios, maybe those two are poised to take over. But it's interesting how history kind of repeats itself through this narrative.
100%.
Or maybe we just want it to repeat itself.
I think we kind of need it to.
So that was the 1980 Wimbledon final, and we managed to try and go high concept.
I think it worked well.
Yeah.
I think it worked well.
I enjoyed it. And that's
also, go see Borg McEnroe if you haven't seen it already. It's a really well done movie. If you're not familiar with that era of tennis and what was the mood back then, it does a good job of kind of capturing it in a good chunk of time that will not cost you days of your life.
Definitely, yeah. Thanks for listening, guys, and we will see you next week.
You cannot be serious!